She didn't knock. She just walked in, dust on her worn-out shoes, silence heavy in her eyes. The ranch was quiet, just like her. No one knew her name, and she didn't offer it. She looked young but carried the weight of years. Her clothes were plain, her hands trembling just slightly as if they had cooked 1,000 meals, but still had something to prove. The old wooden door creaked behind her as she spoke the only words she came prepared to say. "I don't talk much, mister, but I can cook." The rancher stared at her, confused and cautious. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why did her voice sound like she hadn't used it in days? She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for shelter. She asked for something even simpler, a quiet place and a stove. In that moment, the silence between them said more than any conversation ever could. She looked no older than 20, but her eyes carried a lifetime of stories left untold. Her steps were careful, like someone who had learned to walk without being noticed. She wore a faded dress, the kind stitched more for survival than style. Her hair was tied back, not neatly, but with the kind of rush that comes from leaving in a hurry. She never smiled, not once, not even when the warm smell of bread filled the kitchen later that evening. People say you can tell a lot by the way someone looks at a fire. She didn't stare at it for warmth, she stared at it like it reminded her of something that once burned her life down. And when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "I don't talk much, mister, but I can cook." That was it. No questions, no explanations. Just a girl with pain in her past and purpose in her hands. He watched her from the porch, one hand resting on the wooden rail, the other holding a half-empty coffee cup that had long gone cold. The sky above his ranch was painted in soft orange and blue, but he didn't notice beauty anymore. Not in the sky, not in people, not in life. It had been years since his wife died, and since then, the house had grown quieter, the walls colder, and the days longer. The ranch still ran livestock fed, fences mended, hay stacked, but something in him had stopped running a long time ago. He didn't talk much either. Not because he couldn't, but because no one was left to listen. He had hired hands before men, with strong arms and empty hearts, but never anyone who stood at his door with trembling fingers and eyes full of storms. When she said, "I don't talk much, mister, but I can cook," he didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, trying to figure out what it was what made a girl so young sound so broken, and yet so certain. She didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't ask for extra pay. She didn't even ask to stay. She only asked for a stove, and somehow that made her harder to refuse. So he opened the screen door and stepped aside. No words, no welcome, just space to enter if she chose to. She did, quietly, the way rain enters dry land, and noticed at first, but impossible to forget once it soaks in. Over the next few days, she moved through the house like a whisper. No laughter, no loud footsteps, no demands, just warmth, the kind that came from bread rising in the oven, soup simmering on the stove, and something unspoken healing in the air. He didn't ask questions, not about her past, not about the box she kept near her bed, not about the nights she stared out the window long after the world had gone to sleep. But he noticed. He noticed how she always made to plates, even when he said he wasn't hungry. He noticed how she flinched at thunder, how her eyes searched the road whenever a truck passed by, and he noticed how, slowly, the house stopped echoing. The silence wasn't empty anymore, it was peaceful. Still, he kept his distance, until one evening, when she left a small note on the kitchen table. Barely 5 words, "Thank you for the quiet." He stood there, holding that note like it was the first real thing he'd touched in years. Something in him cracked, not in a painful way, but in a way that made room for something else. He didn't know her story, but he knew one thing for sure. She didn't just need work. She needed safety, and maybe, just maybe, he needed her more than he wanted to admit. Not to cook, not to clean, but to remind him what it felt like to care again. The days slipped by like soft footsteps on an old wooden floor, barely heard, barely felt, but something between them had changed. She cooked with quiet hands and steady focus, every meal filled with a kind of care that couldn't be taught. He hadn't eaten like this in years, not because the food was fancy, but because it felt safe, familiar, like something made by someone who understood loneliness, yet. Despite the warmth she brought to the kitchen, she never smiled, not once. She spoke only when necessary, answered politely, but never deeply. He noticed things: the way she jumped slightly whenever the back door slammed in the wind, the way her eyes scanned the horizon before stepping outside. Every night before bed, she would take that small wooden box from the corner near her blanket, open it slowly, hold it in her lap like a fragile piece of glass, then tuck it carefully beneath again, as if protecting something sacred. He never asked what was inside, not yet, but it gnawed at him. What was she running from? Who had she been before this quiet kitchen? Why did her voice sound like it had learned to hide, not speak? The rancher wasn't a man who chased ghosts, but every time she looked away when he walked in, it felt like she was hiding a whole lifetime behind her silence. One evening, while she was out hanging laundry, he stepped into the small guest room she slept in. He didn't touch anything, he just stood there. The room was neat, almost too neat. One pair of shoes, a folded sweater, and that wooden box, its lid carved with tiny stars. He didn't open it. Something in him knew he had no right. But when she returned and saw him standing there, her face didn't show anger. It showed fear, pure, unshaken fear. She said nothing, just gently reached past him, took the box, and held it close like a mother would a child. That night, she didn't eat, didn't speak. She just sat by the window long after the oil lamp was turned off, her silhouette barely moving. He watched from the hallway, heart heavy with questions he wasn't sure he should ask. Was she escaping someone, something? Was this ranch a hiding place or her last hope? Every part of her presence was peaceful, but around that peace was a quiet storm one she refused to let out. And he was starting to care more than he thought he should. Not because she made good food, not because the house was cleaner, but because her silence spoke to something broken inside him too. And every day that passed without knowing her truth, he feared that whatever she was hiding might come looking. That night, the wind howled like something alive, clawing at the windows and rattling the doors. Thunder cracked over the hills, and the lights flickered once, then again. Before dying into darkness, the power was gone, but the storm inside the house was just beginning. He lit an old lantern and placed it in the hallway, just outside her door. Unsure if she'd need the light or company, she hadn't spoken all day. Her eyes had that distant look again, the kind that didn't see the present, but only remembered the past. Inside her room, something fell, a thud, not loud, but sharp. He walked closer, hesitant, and saw her sitting on the floor, the small wooden box tipped over beside her. Its contents had spilled, delicate and broken, just like her. Photos faded at the edges, corners burned, a single letter charred halfway through, its words unreadable, and a tiny bracelet, no bigger than a child's wrist, with pink beads and a plastic heart charm. She didn't look up when he entered. She just stared at the bracelet like it still held the heartbeat of someone she'd lost. Her hands shook as she reached for it, fingers trembling too much to hold on. And then she broke, not loudly, not wildly, just quietly, like a dam giving way under the weight of too many silent floods. Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "He took everything from me. I just wanted somewhere safe." That was all she said, but it was enough to open a door she had kept locked for far too long. She cried, and he let her, not with words, but with presence. He sat beside her, not touching, not questioning, just being there, letting the silence between them be soft instead of sharp. Through broken breaths, she spoke in fragments. A man who promised love but gave control. A child born in hope and lost in fire. A life escaped in the dead of night with only a box and the memory of what used to be. She wasn't running to something. She was running from someone. The law had failed her. The world had turned away, and all she had left was the instinct to survive. She looked at him then, for the first time, not with fear, but with tired, aching eyes that had finally said all they could. "I didn't come here for a job," she whispered. "I came because I had nowhere else." And he understood. Not the full story, not every detail, but enough. Enough to know that this girl wasn't just carrying pain, she was carrying the weight of surviving it. And in that storm-lit room, filled with shadows and sorrow, something unspoken passed between them. Not pity, not rescue, just recognition of the people broken in different ways, somehow finding comfort in the same quiet place. He didn't say much, just stood there, watching her gather the spilled memories with shaking hands and eyes that had seen too much. But this time, he didn't look at her like a stranger passing through. He looked at her like someone who belonged not because she earned a place, but because she was the missing piece he didn't know he needed. He stepped forward, quietly, and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're hired," he said, his voice low, steady, and sure. Then, after a pause, softer still, "And you're home." No grand promises, no dramatic music, just her broken hearts finally standing still. She looked up, tears in her eyes, not of fear this time, but of release, in the silence that followed. There were no words, only understanding, and that small, quiet ranch once empty and forgotten finally felt full again, not with people, but with peace, with healing, and with hope, the kind that stays.